Hey guys, so I'm going to run you through a lower body workout today with Danielle. I'm going to give you some instructional cues on certain exercises, show you how we warm up, and run you through the full session so you can go and try this at home. So before any lower body movements, most people have super tight hip flexors and TFLs. So one of my favorite mobility exercises is getting my clients to lay on the handle of the kettlebell, roughly between 1 to 2 minutes per side, rolling from the front of the hip flexor around to the TFL, so just below the hip bone. Completely frees up the hips and allows you to keep your pelvis in a neutral position so you can actually use your glutes when we train. So once we've done our mobility through the hips, we're then moving into a quick activation movement. So we've got a glute band just above the ankle. Danielle's going to sit her hips back, pull the pelvis in towards the spine. We're going to do side steps up for about 10 to 20 steps to the left, and then same thing back to the right. So hips are back, chest is slightly leaning forward, and we're not letting the feet come inside shoulder width. So just keeping tension on that band to fire up the glutes before we move into our first movement. So we're going to move into a superset of a barbell squat. We're going to also elevate the heels with this slant board here. Then we're going to superset that with a glute and hamstring exercise on a 45-degree glute and hamstring movement. So firstly, Danielle's going to start in with just a set with a bar by itself to get the movement right. So she's going to do a set of around 15 to 20 reps with the bar, and then we're going to add some load and then start on the first superset. All right, so with the barbell squat, or any squat for that matter, we really want to open up the stance. So you can see Danielle's feet are slightly rotated out. We're using this slant board to improve her mobility of ankles, of the ankles and through the calves. And then the cues I'm getting her to think about is hips back, knees out. So it's really breaking from the hips, so hips back, knees out. And then once we get to the top, you can either finish in full extension to take the load off the lower back, but just keep in mind that the main load on the glutes is at the bottom of the rep. So getting nice and low, weight through the heels, forcing the knees out. We're going to go for a set of 8 on this set. So we're supersetting the squat with a 45-degree glute hamstring exercise, which is one of my favorites. So there's a few key things we really need to focus on. So we're going to round the upper back as much as possible. And we're also going to try and keep the pelvis in posterior tilt, so tucking the pelvis back so that we don't engage the lower back muscles. So we've got 16 reps, and I'm going to get Danielle to hold onto this plate. She's going to hold onto the plate. At the top of the movement, we're pulling up until we can squeeze hammies and glutes. So hammies and glutes only, no lower back. Then we're going to stretch all the way back down. These ones can be nice and quick, just making sure we stay in that rounded position so you can't use the lower back. So between these sets, we're resting for anywhere between 60 to 120 seconds, so 1 to 2 minutes. With squats in particular, I like to rest long enough so that you actually feel like you're ready to go again. So not worrying too much about keeping the rest super short, because if your form's going to be shit on the next set, then I'd prefer you to actually rest a little longer. So not too long between sets, keeping the intensity up nice and high, but set of 8 on our squat, set of 16 on the glute hamstring raises, focusing on perfect technique. So one other cue that you can really think about with all squats, deadlifts, or lunge variations is keeping your chin down. So you imagine you've got a tennis ball between chest and chin, so that spine stays nice and straight. If I lift my chin up at the bottom of a squat, then I really open up and overextend to the lower back. So Danielle's just picking a spot about 1 meter ahead and keeping her eyes down on the floor, forcing the knees out and trying to squeeze the glute to the top. We're focusing on that depth at the bottom, forcing the hips right back. This time we'll do it with the band. So set number 1, we use the plate to add some form of resistance. For set number 2, we're going to use bands. So what that does with the band is that it creates tension at the top and the bottom of the rep. So the bottom is still difficult, but then the top, there's still load at the top as well. So improving the amount of tension on the glutes throughout the whole exercise. So we're going to go hands through, band above the upper back, rounding the arms across the chest, keeping the pelvis in posterior tilt and squeezing at the top. So full squeeze and then stretch. So we're trying to avoid using the lower back at all. Now we're moving on to our second lot of exercises, and we're going to be supersetting a barbell Romanian deadlift, which is one of my favorite movements for the hamstrings and glutes. So I'm going to run you through the technique and the cues that we're going to focus on there. We're also going to be supersetting that with a hip thrust, just with the band. So we're not going to load up with the barbell today, we're just going to use a band. I'll also show you the correct way to set up for a hip thrust, even if you are using a barbell, to make sure we're not using the lower back and making sure we're keeping all the focus on the glutes. We're going to start with the barbell Romanian deadlift for a set of 8 as well. So with the Romanian deadlift, the key is that we're thinking about lifting the hips to the roof. So we're trying to lengthen the hamstring. So I'm not too focused about how low the hands are with the load. It's all about keeping the hips up towards the roof. So the slight bend in the knees, transferring most of the weight over the front of the foot. You almost want to think about keeping the weight through the inside of the ball of your foot. And as we come down, we're lifting the hips to the roof. So lengthening through the hammies, and then we're driving the heels into the floor and squeezing the glutes to the top of each rep, making sure we're not overextending and arching the lower back at the top. So we're supersetting the Romanian deadlift with a hip thrust with a band. So we're adding a band just above the knees to create some extra tension. focus on tucking the pelvis in and pushing through the heels with the heels directly below the knees. So the setup position for the hip thrust, we want our mid to upper back on the edge of the box or the bench, and we're keeping our head forward to avoid any overextension of the lower back at the bottom of the movement. So pelvis stays in posterior tilt, pushing through the heels, eyes stay forward. If you struggle with the Romanian deadlift in terms of your grip, where often people do in terms of being able to hold the bar long enough, try an alternating grip. So Danielle's got alternating grip here, one over, one under, which will allow you to hold the bar longer without feeling in your forearms for your hamstrings. Really think of this as a smooth movement. As the bar comes down, the hips come up towards the roof. Imagine we're standing right in front of a wall and we're trying not to touch your bum on the wall. So chin down, hips up. Alrighty, so next exercise, we're gonna do a Bulgarian split squat. So Danielle's gonna be holding 2 weights. So with this split squat, you've kind of got the choice of either body weight or 1 weight in either hand or 2. So we're gonna hold 2 weights, we're gonna relax the back foot on the bench, tilt forward from the hips, and we're just dropping straight up and down. All the load through this front leg. Okay, so key points, try and relax this back foot on the bench, relax the back knee. We're tilting forward from the hips slightly and dropping straight up and down to this front heel. So similar to the RDL, the pelvis is tucked under, the chin is tucked in, and we've got a nice and angled torso, similar to like you would be if you were about to take off for a sprint, so all the loads through that glute. We also want to try and make sure this front knee is not pressing forward past the toes. Just in this instance, it's okay in some exercises, but for this one, we're trying to make sure the knee stays behind the toes. And again, we're just loading up this glute of the front leg by keeping the weight to that front heel. Because we spend so much time during the day sitting down, when our hip flexors get tight, we need to be doing something to open them back up. So between sets is a great time while you're taking your rest. 1 foot up on the bench, knee directly below the hip, and trying to stay up nice and tall to lengthen out through the hip flexors and quads. Okay, so second set, 12 reps. So that front foot, we want the front foot to not be too close to the bench. So we want it far enough that we can just relax this back knee, because if we tense this back calf or hamstring or quad, then it's going to start to fire up this back glute. We don't want to work the back one, we're trying to load up this front leg. Nice, last couple of reps, get weight to the front heel. Same range every single rep. So as the sets go on and we get more fatigue, we still want to work through the same range with the same quality of every rep. Quality is way more important than the quantity of reps. So our next movement is a seated hamstring curl. So it's really important with the setup that we have that correct. So you want the knees aligned with where the axle is of the machine. The padding should be around like the bottom of the Achilles, so we can keep the toes pulled back towards the shins and not use the calves. This padding is just going to come down just above the knees, and from here we're going to try and keep the lower back pinned into the bench. So locking the arms in, toes to the shins so we can't use the calves, and pulling those heels in all the way up towards the bum. And you should do a set of 10 for me. So the reason we've got the toes to the shins is to eliminate the recruitment of the calves, so we can really fire up the hamstrings. And we're keeping that lower back flat into the bench so that again we're not arching through the back and starting to pull through the lower back. Same applies when we do our lying hamstring curls. We're trying to brace the abs, maintain neutral posture so we can load up the hamstrings and not the back. So a question that comes up a lot and it's really useful to know is that when you're in the gym in terms of rep ranges, so when we're working in lower rep ranges with much higher loads or higher rep ranges with much lower loads, the lower rep ranges is where we're building our strength, and that's where we're starting to build on our central nervous system. So the amount of load that our central nervous system can tolerate. The higher rep ranges is where we get the volume in, the more reps, right? So over time we're focusing on quality set, but we need a mixture of both. So the lower rep range is what will build our strength so that when we do the higher rep ranges, we can lift heavier loads. Over time we can progressively overload, which is the only way you can see results, by doing either more weight, more reps, more sets, over time. So they work hand in hand. In these workout sessions, I always try and start with the heavier loads and the lower rep ranges at the beginning of the session, and then as we start to fatigue, that's when we reduce the weight, go to higher rep ranges towards the end, and start to work on more of that metabolic work. With the lower rep ranges and heavier loads, obviously that's working on our strength, and that's something that we should retain over time. When we transition to higher reps and lower loads, although the weight will be less, we're going to have more muscular fatigue. So we're going to break down the muscle tissue a lot more, which does help with building muscle and the hypertrophy, so increase in the lean muscle tissue. But you will probably be sore because the overall volume is going to be higher. So the lower rep ranges will build up that strength. You probably shouldn't feel as sore from those sessions because we're not breaking the actual muscle tissue down as much. When we go into the higher rep ranges, we're breaking it down a lot more. So on all strength movements, the idea is that when we're moving the weight, we want to move it with maximum force. So we're recruiting as many muscle fibers as possible. So on the way down, Danielle's going to pull down nice and fast. And then we're going to control the eccentric phase. So when we're lengthening the muscle back out again, we're controlling that load with a nice and controlled tempo. The concentric phase, we're pulling it in as fast as we can, Think of like a bench press or a squat. We're trying to move the weight as fast as possible to recruit more muscle fibers. Trying to get out of every exercise. It's what she does all the time. This is about a quarter of the complaining that we would see in a regular session with Danielle. That's right. Fucking hell. So this will be our last kind of like tricep of the session. We're going to be incorporating some high rep strength work into some weighted conditioning with in the sled, and then finishing off with a box jump. So the goal here is not worrying about how much weight is on a machine or worrying about anything like that. We're still focusing on quality reps. We're really trying to burn out to finish this session off and get some metabolic work. Our overload is already done now. Now we're just going to focus on some form of hit in the way of strength exercises. So we're going to go for a set of 12 on this one, all right? So weight through the heels. So as I said, load is quite low, rep range is going to be a bit higher. We're going for a set of 15. I'm getting Danielle to come down quite low. We're still controlling the eccentric phase and then pressing up fast. Good, we're trying to keep the weight through the heels, and we're avoiding any lockout of the knees at the top of each rep. So whenever you're doing leg press, squats or whatever, try not to lock the knees out because it puts a lot of load on the back of the knee. And okay, from the machine here, we're going straight to the sled push. So with the sled, we're going to go like a medium load. I'm going to get Danielle to focus on just driving the knees. All right, so we're really pushing as hard as we can against the sled. We're not focusing too much on speed here. Focus on driving the knees and getting that drive through the legs for about 15 to 20 meters before you go into 5 box jumps and do the same thing on the way back. So we're trying to keep that heart rate up, focusing on quality over quantity the whole time. One more, and then we're pushing the sled back. All right, focusing on knee drive on the way back. Trying to keep that body slightly angled forward. So between these sets, even though the intensity is nice and high, we want to rest long enough so that the intensity can stay at that level. If we don't rest long enough between like max effort hit stuff, then as the sets go on, our quality drops right off and we're not getting the most out of it. So we're gonna take about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes before we go again for another 3 to 4 rounds. Okay, so we're gonna finish off with 5 minutes of abs. All right, so we're gonna have 5 exercises, 50 seconds of each with 10 seconds between. I'm gonna run you through all 5 now. We're gonna start off with the lying leg raise. So legs nice and straight. We're bringing them down until we can feel like we can't hold any longer with our abs. So controlling down, keeping the lower back flat. And then when we get to the top, we're gonna roll the hips to the chest. All right, so we're going for 50 seconds starting now. So whenever you're training your abs, you really wanna focus on contracting the abs on every rep. So as we control down, we're keeping the lower back flat, and then when we roll up, we're exhaling. So exhale every time we contract. Make these reps nice and smooth, eliminating any momentum. We've got another 15 seconds to go here. Okay, second exercise, we're gonna do a crunch between the legs. Feet on the floor, hands in between the legs. So whenever we're doing crunches, we're thinking about rolling the ribs down towards the hips. When we're trying to engage our lower abs, we're thinking about rolling the hips towards the chest. So in this case, we're working the upper abs, crunching in between the legs and staying in that top half. So we keep that tension on the upper abs. So our third exercise is a bike crunch. So the leg that's straight comes low to the floor, and we're thinking about crunching our shoulder across towards the hip to engage the obliques. So although the knee and the elbow are coming towards each other, we want to think about shoulder towards the hip. Next up, you're going to flip over into a plank. So we're going to do a plank on our forearms. Main things we're thinking about is bracing the abs, so belly buttoning towards the spine, squeeze the glutes, keep the lower back flat, and keep that weight evenly between our shoulders and our toes. 3, 2, 1. Final exercise, we're going to finish with a V-sit. So we're tucking our pelvis under like we would for a Russian twist. Feet are up off the floor. We're going to start with hands out to the front. We're going to come out to the side, and then we're going to finally finish off with the hands directly to the roof. Focus on keeping the pelvis tucked under. So trying to pull the pelvis under so that we don't engage our hip flexors or our lower back. Out of 5 seconds, you're going to bring your hands out to the side. 3, 2, 1. Hands out to the side. All right, final 10 seconds, hands up to the roof. Reaching up nice and tall. Belly buttoning towards the spine. Almost there. This is the last exercise of this session. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Finished. Good job. Pac-Man. Good job.